This is the one day of the year where the church forbids, or that might sound harsh, instructs that there not be a Mass, that there not be the celebration of the sacrifice of the Mass. And I think it's important to maybe reflect on that, on why that is. And before I do that, I would like to maybe think for a moment or reflect a little bit on what the church teaches that the Mass is. The Mass is the unbloody sacrifice and representation of the sacrifice of Calvary. So it's the unbloody sacrifice. We believe that we're taking Christ and we're offering Christ back to the Father in the Eucharist as a sacrifice. But it's unbloody because obviously it remains on all appearances not the bloody and sacrificed body of Christ, but it looks like, from all appearances, a piece of bread. So the Mass is the unbloody sacrifice and representation of the sacrifice of Calvary, the death of Christ on the cross. And so a lot of times people will say and have objections to our Catholic teaching of what the Mass is, and they will say, but Calvary, the crucifixion of Christ, was a one-time thing. It was a one time, and that's over. It was a historical event, and that historical event has concluded. It concluded 2,000 years ago. So it's over, which is why you don't see anywhere else, other than Catholic churches typically, crucifixes. We believe that in the Mass, we, in a sense, are in the presence of the sacrifice of Calvary. We are there worshiping Christ, crucified and sacrificed. And some people would say, well, how can that be? I mean, does the crucifixion just drug out over time? But of course we know that God is not bound by time. And the events that God is wrapped up in are not bound by time. And so we believe that we taste and we are presented at Mass with the crucifixion, with the same sacrifice that Christ died on the cross with. And so when people raise that objection, it's important to also, I think, note that St. Paul in his letter to the Colossians notes that my suffering, St. Paul says, my suffering is filling up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Now, that sounds like, is he saying Christ's sufferings on the cross were not enough? Absolutely not. But he's saying that we are given the opportunity when we suffer to be united and join and help carry out the continued suffering of Christ, which is, again, something that is an eternal reality. It's not bound by time. So my suffering is united to the cross of Christ anytime I suffer, and I can offer that up for other people. In the same way, the Mass is united to the celebration or the sacrifice on Calvary. And so, because of that, obviously we give thanks and praise for the Mass. But then the final question I think that comes up, if we're following all of that, the question becomes, well, if Mass is a representation, in some way our ability to reach out and touch the crucifixion and the historical event of the crucifixion of Christ, then this would be the perfect day to have Mass. This would be the perfect opportunity because we're celebrating His crucifixion today and we're remembering His crucifixion today. So why, of all the days to not have Mass, this would seem like the worst day to not have Mass? So what's going on here? A priest friend of mine, I was reflecting on this and doing some praying and research, and a priest friend who has a blog and is a theologian wrote this, and I thought I would share this. The Good Friday liturgy, which is what we're celebrating here today, a liturgy, not a Mass, the Good Friday liturgy is in fact a more perfect representation of the sacrifice of the cross than is the Mass. You are more perfectly united to Calvary on Good Friday than you are by offering Mass on any other day of the year. That's a really powerful statement about what the church believes we're doing here today. We're not having Mass as some kind of punishment for killing Jesus. What we're actually doing is we're saying that in this liturgy, in this celebration that we have once a year, we are actually somehow even more closely united to the crucified Christ than when we celebrate the Mass. Now that's an amazing belief, and that's an amazing teaching of our church. We give thanks for this opportunity to gather and worship today. We still, of course, receive the Eucharist. We receive the Eucharist. The Eucharist is retrieved. We consecrated enough hosts yesterday to also provide us for communion today. So it's not that Christ leaves us without nourishment, but he's saying, in fact, that by not having Mass, we're showing the true dignity of this particular celebration, which certainly, I think, speaks volumes and certainly drew me closer to our liturgical celebration that we're participating today. Christ, our head, the head of the body, was crucified and died for us. And we, as the body, are able to continue to unite ourselves to that suffering and to that crucifixion. May we do so in the celebration of this liturgy today, this moment in our church's calendar where we are even closer to the crucifixion of Calvary than we are when we celebrate the Mass.